The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverton Ranch in Nebraska, where the sound of hooves against packed earth echoed through the valley like distant thunder. Jake Martinez wiped sweat from his brow as he watched the massive bulls moving through their morning routine, each animal worth more than most people's houses. At 26, Jake had dedicated his life to understanding these magnificent beasts that others feared. With a veterinary degree gathering dust in his small apartment, he'd chosen the dangerous but rewarding path of professional bull training. His gentle approach and intuitive understanding of animal behavior had earned him respect throughout the rodeo circuit, though financial security remained elusive. The pride of Riverton Ranch was Runders, a spectacular black Brahman bull whose reputation preceded him into every arena from Kansas to Texas. Standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing over 2,000 pounds, Runders possessed an intelligence that unnerved many handlers. His dark eyes seemed to study everyone who approached, calculating their intentions with unsettling accuracy. But with Jake, Runders was different. Over 18 months of daily interaction, a profound bond had developed between man and beast. Where other trainers relied on dominance and fear, Jake had earned Runders' trust through patience, respect, and an almost supernatural ability to sense the animal's moods and needs. "Morning, big guy," Jake said softly, approaching the massive bull's enclosure. Runders lifted his enormous head, ears perking forward in recognition. The bull's usual morning greeting was a gentle sniff of Jake's outstretched hand, followed by a rumbling sound deep in his chest that Jake had learned to interpret as contentment. This morning felt different. Runders approached the fence, but his movements seemed labored, lacking their usual fluid grace. His powerful frame trembled slightly, and his breathing appeared more rapid than normal. Jake's trained eye immediately picked up on subtle signs that others might dismiss. The way Runders held his head lower than usual, the tension in his muscular shoulders, the wariness in his typically confident gaze. "What's troubling you, buddy?" Jake murmured, his voice filled with genuine concern. He'd learned to trust his instincts about these animals, and every fiber of his being was telling him something was seriously wrong with Runders. Ranch owner Marcus Riverton's voice cut through the morning air like a whip crack. "Martinez, the performance buyers arrive in 2 hours. Runders better be ready to show why he's worth $800,000. Riverton strode across the yard, his expensive boots clicking against concrete, dollar signs practically gleaming in his eyes. Jake hesitated, studying Runders' labored breathing. "Sir, I think we should have Dr. Camden examine him first. He's showing signs of distress that could indicate serious health issues." Riverton's face darkened. "That bull generates more revenue than anything else on this ranch, Martinez. He's performing today, end of discussion. Your job is to make sure he's ready, not to play veterinarian." As Riverton walked away, Jake turned back to Runders, seeing something heartbreaking in the bull's eyes. Despite his obvious discomfort, there was complete trust there. Faith that Jake would protect him, would understand what he couldn't communicate in words. The weight of that trust settled on Jake's shoulders like a physical burden. Throughout the morning, Runders' condition seemed to deteriorate. By noon, the magnificent bull who had never shown weakness was struggling to maintain his usual proud posture. Yet when the buyers arrived and demanded a demonstration, Riverton's orders were clear. The show must go on. Standing in the Nebraska sunshine, watching his closest companions suffer in silence while powerful men debated his monetary value, Jake Martinez had no idea that he was about to face the greatest test of his career. A crisis was approaching that would force him to choose between financial security and moral courage, between following orders and following his heart. The ordinary world of routine training and predictable challenges was about to explode into chaos, and it would begin with a desperate animal's plea for help and a veterinarian's shocking discovery that would reveal a truth more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Runders' condition had become impossible to ignore. The magnificent bull stood in his pen, with his head hanging low, his powerful frame swaying slightly as if he were struggling to remain upright. His usual alert ears drooped, and his breathing had become shallow and labored. Jake's veterinary instincts screamed warnings that he could no longer dismiss. "That's it," he said firmly, pulling out his phone to call Dr. Camden despite Riverton's explicit orders. "I don't care what the boss says. This animal needs immediate medical attention." Dr. Elena Camden arrived within 20 minutes, her pickup truck kicking up dust as she pulled into the ranch yard. A seasoned veterinarian with 15 years of experience treating large animals. She took one look at Runders, and her expression grew grave. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, already unpacking her medical equipment while studying the bull's posture and breathing patterns. "Since early this morning, but it's gotten progressively worse," Jake replied, opening the gate to allow Dr. Camden into the enclosure. "He's not responding to food, barely drinking water, and his temperature feels elevated." Runders, despite his obvious distress, allowed Dr. Camden to approach and begin her examination. His trust in Jake extended to anyone the trainer vouched for, demonstrating the depth of their bond even in his weakened state. "His heart rate is dangerously elevated," Dr. Camden muttered, pressing her stethoscope against the bull's massive chest. "Temperature is 104 degrees, and his breathing indicates significant respiratory distress." She looked up at Jake with concern. This isn't just illness. Something is seriously wrong internally. Marcus Riverton appeared at the fence, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is going on here? I specifically told you that Bull needed to perform today, Martinez." Dr. Camden straightened, her professional authority evident in her posture. "Mr. Riverton, this animal is in critical condition. He needs emergency surgery immediately, or we could lose him within hours." "Surgery?" Riverton's voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what that bull is worth? What if something goes wrong during the operation?" "If we don't operate," Dr. Camden replied firmly, "something will definitely go wrong. His symptoms suggest internal bleeding, possibly from a ruptured organ. Every minute we delay increases the risk." Jake watched as Runders' legs trembled with the effort of remaining standing. The proud bull who had dominated every arena he'd entered was now fighting just to stay on his feet. In that moment, Jake made a decision that would change everything. "Do the surgery," he said quietly. Riverton whirled around. "You don't have the authority to make that call, Martinez." "Then fire me," Jake replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But I won't watch him die because you're more concerned about money than his life." Dr. Camden nodded approvingly. "We'll need to transport him to my clinic immediately. I'll call ahead to prepare the surgical suite." As the veterinary transport trailer pulled up, something extraordinary happened. Runders, sensing the commotion around him and perhaps understanding that his fate was being decided, took several unsteady steps toward Jake. Despite his weakness, despite the pain that was clearly coursing through his massive frame, he lowered his enormous head until it came to rest gently against Jake's shoulder. The gesture was unmistakably one of trust, comfort-seeking, and goodbye. Runders' warm breath against Jake's neck seemed to say everything the animal couldn't speak aloud: his gratitude for Jake's care, his faith that whatever happened next, his human friend would make the right choice. Jake's throat tightened as he wrapped his arms around the bull's massive neck, feeling the tremors running through the powerful body. "I won't let you down, buddy," he whispered. "Whatever it takes, we're going to figure this out together." Dr. Camden watched the interaction with professional interest and personal amazement. In her years of veterinary practice, she had rarely witnessed such a profound connection between human and animal. It was clear that Runders wasn't just seeking physical comfort. He was entrusting his life to the one person he believed would fight for him. "Let's go," she said softly. "Time is running out." As they carefully loaded Runders into the transport trailer, Jake climbed in beside him, refusing to leave the bull's side. The call to adventure had arrived in the form of a desperate animal's trust and a life-or-death medical crisis that would test everything Jake believed about loyalty, courage, and doing what's right, regardless of the consequences. The journey to Dr. Camden's clinic would be the beginning of an ordeal that would reveal shocking truths and transform both their lives forever. During the tense 20-minute drive to Camden Veterinary Clinic, Jake's resolve began to waver as the full weight of his decision crashed down upon him. Sitting beside Runders in the cramped transport trailer, watching the bull's labored breathing and feeling the weakness in his massive frame, Jake was overwhelmed by doubt and fear. "What if I'm wrong?" Jake whispered to himself, his hand resting on Runders' neck. "What if this isn't as serious as we think, and I've just destroyed my career for nothing?" His phone buzzed incessantly with angry texts from Marcus Riverton. Each message was more threatening than the last, making it clear that Jake's employment at Riverton Ranch was over. The financial reality hit him like a physical blow. He had student loans, rent, and basic living expenses that his now terminated job had barely covered. Dr. Camden glanced back through the partition window. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, her voice gentle but direct. "It's natural to feel overwhelmed when you're making life-changing decisions." Jake's veterinary training warred with his practical fears. He'd spent years learning to diagnose and treat animals, but he'd also spent the last 3 years accepting that he might never practice veterinary medicine professionally. The student debt was crushing, and starting his own practice seemed impossible without capital or connections. "I'm not even a real veterinarian anymore," Jake said bitterly. "I train bulls for rich ranchers who see them as walking dollar signs. What makes me qualified to make decisions about emergency surgery on an $800,000 animal?" Runders shifted uncomfortably, his breathing becoming more shallow. Despite his own distress, the bull seemed to sense Jake's internal struggle. With tremendous effort, he lifted his massive head and gently nuzzled Jake's arm, a gesture of reassurance from an animal who was fighting for his own life. The simple act of comfort from Runders broke something loose in Jake's chest. This magnificent creature, even in his moment of greatest vulnerability, was trying to support the human he trusted most. The purity of that loyalty shamed Jake's doubts and fears. "You know what the worst part is?" Jake continued, his voice cracking. "If something goes wrong during surgery, if we lose him, everyone will say I was the irresponsible trainer who pushed for unnecessary medical intervention. If the surgery reveals something expensive or complicated, Riverton will sue me for the costs." Dr. Camden pulled into her clinic's parking lot and turned off the engine. "Jake, in my 15 years as a veterinarian, I've learned that the hardest decisions are usually the right ones. That bull chose you for a reason. He trusts your judgment more than he trusts his own survival instincts." But Jake was spiraling into panic as the reality of the situation became clear. "I can't afford this," he said desperately. "Even if Riverton doesn't sue me, even if we save Runders, I'm unemployed with no references and no prospects. I should call this off, take him back to the ranch and hope for the best." "Look at him, Jake," Dr. Camden said firmly. "Really look at him. Does that seem like an animal who has time for you to figure out your career concerns?" Runders' condition had visibly worsened during the short transport. His eyes, usually bright with intelligence and spirit, were glazed with pain and exhaustion. His powerful body, which had dominated rodeo arenas across multiple states, was now trembling with the effort of simply breathing. Jake felt the crushing weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Every choice seemed to lead to disaster. Operating could kill Runders or bankrupt Jake, but not operating would almost certainly result in the bull's death within hours. "What if I'm not strong enough for this?" Jake whispered, voicing his deepest fear. "What if I make the wrong choice and destroy both our lives?" Dr. Camden opened the trailer door, letting afternoon sunlight stream across Runders' prone form. "Strength isn't about having all the answers, Jake. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified of the consequences." Standing at the threshold between his old life and an uncertain future, Jake Martinez faced the classic refusal of the call, the moment when the hero must choose between the safety of the known world and the terrifying responsibility of stepping into the unknown to save what matters most. Runders' labored breathing filled the silence as Jake struggled with the most important decision of his life. As Jake hesitated at the trailer door, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, Dr. Elena Camden stepped forward and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. In that moment, she transformed from simply a veterinarian responding to an emergency call into something Jake desperately needed, a mentor who understood both the medical crisis and his personal struggle. "Jake, I need to tell you something," Dr. Camden said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. 20 years ago, I was exactly where you are right now. Fresh out of veterinary school, drowning in debt, working for someone who cared more about profit than the animals we were supposed to protect. Jake looked up at her with surprise. Dr. Camden had always seemed so confident, so established in her successful practice. It was hard to imagine her ever feeling as lost and overwhelmed as he did in this moment. "There was a horse," she continued, her eyes distant with memory. "A beautiful thoroughbred named Midnight Storm. His owner was pushing him to race despite clear signs of injury. I was just an assistant then, and my boss told me to keep quiet, give the horse painkillers, and let him run. Dr. Camden guided Jake to sit on the clinic's front steps while her assistant began preparing the surgical suite inside. Runders remained stable in the trailer, his condition critical, but not immediately deteriorating. "What did you do?" Jake asked, though something in her expression already suggested the answer. "I did what I was told," she said simply. "I stayed quiet, and Midnight Storm ran that race. He shattered his leg in the final turn and had to be euthanized on the track." The pain in her voice was still fresh after 2 decades. "I told myself I was just following orders, that it wasn't my responsibility to challenge my superiors." Jake felt a chill of recognition. "But it haunted you every single day," Dr. Camden confirmed. "I realized that night that having a veterinary degree means nothing if you don't have the courage to use it. The knowledge is worthless without the moral strength to act on what you know is right." She turned to face Jake directly, her expression intense but compassionate. "That's why I started my own practice. That's why I've spent the last 15 years building a reputation based on putting animal welfare above everything else, including profit, convenience, and popular opinion." Jake studied her weathered face, seeing the strength that came from making difficult choices and living with their consequences. "But what if I'm wrong about Runders? What if we operate and he dies on the table? Then you'll know you tried everything possible to save him," Dr. Camden replied firmly. "But if you walk away now, if you let fear make this decision for you, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have made a difference." She stood and walked to the trailer, where Runders lay struggling for each breath. "Jake, this bull chose you. Out of all the handlers, all the trainers, all the people who could have been responsible for his care, fate put him in your hands. That's not a coincidence. That's a responsibility." Dr. Camden's assistant appeared in the clinic doorway. "Doctor, the surgical suite is ready, but we need to move quickly. His vitals are becoming unstable." Jake felt the moment of truth arriving like a tidal wave. Everything he'd studied, everything he'd dreamed of becoming, everything he believed about the relationship between humans and animals was crystallizing into this single decision. "Jake," Dr. Camden said, her voice gentle but urgent, "I can't make this choice for you, but I can tell you that in my experience, the animals know. They choose their humans for reasons we don't always understand. Runders is trusting you to save his life. The question is, do you trust yourself enough to try?" Jake looked at Runders, seeing the bull's dark eyes fixed on him with unwavering faith. Even in his weakened state, even facing the possibility of death, the magnificent animal radiated complete confidence in his human companion. "What do I need to know?" Jake asked quietly, his voice steady with newfound resolve. Dr. Camden smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her since arriving at the clinic. "You need to know that you're not alone in this. I'll be with you every step of the way, and together, we're going to give Runders the best possible chance." As they prepared to move the bull into surgery, Jake felt something shift inside him. The terrified, doubt-ridden trainer was giving way to the veterinarian he'd always been meant to become. Dr. Camden hadn't just offered medical expertise, she'd given him the courage to trust his own knowledge and instincts. The mentor had appeared at exactly the moment the hero needed guidance, and now Jake was ready to cross the threshold into the extraordinary world of high-stakes veterinary surgery, where shocking truths awaited discovery. The sterile fluorescent lights of Camden Veterinary Clinic's surgical suite cast everything in stark relief as Jake helped transfer Runders from the transport gurney to the operating table. The massive bull, weakened by pain and internal trauma, offered no resistance as they positioned him for surgery. His trust in Jake remained absolute, even as anesthesia began to take effect. "This is it," Dr. Camden said quietly, her hands already scrubbed and gloved as she reviewed the pre-surgical diagnostics one final time. "Once we make the first incision, there's no turning back. His condition is too critical for us to stop and reconsider." Jake nodded, pulling on his own surgical gloves with the practiced efficiency that came flooding back from veterinary school. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged, not training animals for entertainment, but using his knowledge and skills to save a life that mattered more to him than his own career. Vitals are stabilizing under anesthesia, reported Dr. Camden's assistant, monitoring the array of machines that tracked Runder's heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. But his internal pressure reading suggests significant abdominal bleeding. The first incision revealed what Dr. Camden had suspected. Runder's abdominal cavity was filled with blood from what appeared to be a ruptured organ. But as she carefully explored the source of the bleeding, her expression shifted from focused concentration to bewildered confusion. "Jake, come look at this," she said, her voice tight with concern. "This isn't what I expected to find." Jake moved closer to the operating table, peering into the surgical site. What he saw made his blood run cold. Instead of a naturally ruptured spleen or liver, there was clear evidence of trauma, but not the kind that came from accident or illness. "Those are puncture wounds," Jake said quietly, his veterinary training allowing him to recognize the precise, deliberate nature of the injuries. Someone did this to him. This wasn't a medical emergency, it was an attack. Dr. Camden's hands trembled slightly as she continued her exploration of the abdominal cavity. There are 3 separate puncture sites, all strategically placed to cause maximum internal bleeding without external evidence. This required knowledge of bovine anatomy and surgical precision. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately injured Runders, timing the attack to coincide with the performance demonstration for potential buyers. The goal hadn't been to kill the bull immediately, but to make him appear sick and worthless, potentially forcing Marcus Riverton to sell him at a drastically reduced price. "Who would do this?" Jake asked, though even as the words left his mouth, he began to suspect the answer. "Who has access to Runders, knowledge of his value, and the veterinary skills to inflict this kind of calculated injury?" "Doctor." Camden worked quickly to repair the puncture wounds, her surgical expertise evident in every precise movement. "The question isn't just who did this, Jake. The question is why they wanted Runders to appear worthless, and what they planned to do with him once they acquired him at a reduced price." As the surgery progressed, Jake found himself crossing more than just the threshold into veterinary practice. He was entering a world of deliberate animal cruelty that challenged everything he thought he understood about the people in his profession. The ordinary world of ranch life and bull training had given way to something darker and more sinister. "There," Dr. Camden announced, completing the final sutures on the internal repairs. "The bleeding is controlled, and there's no sign of infection. He should make a full recovery, but Jake, we need to call the police. This is assault, possibly attempted theft, and definitely animal cruelty." Jake's phone buzzed with another threatening message from Marcus Riverton, but this time the tone was different. Instead of anger about unauthorized medical expenses, Riverton was demanding to know when Runders would be available for transport to a new buyer who had made an exceptional offer for the bull. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Someone had injured Runders to make him appear sick and worthless, forcing a desperate sale at a fraction of his true value. The buyer was probably the same person who had orchestrated the attack, creating the perfect scheme to acquire a champion bull for pennies on the dollar. "Dr. Camden," Jake said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "I think Marcus Riverton is involved in this. The timing is too convenient. Runders gets mysteriously sick on the day of a major sales presentation, and suddenly there's a buyer willing to take him off Riverton's hands at a reduced price." As if responding to his name being spoken, Runders began to stir on the operating table. Despite being under anesthesia, despite the trauma of surgery, the magnificent bull seemed to sense that Jake was nearby. His massive head turned slightly in Jake's direction, and one dark eye opened to focus on the man who had fought to save his life. In that moment, Jake realized he had crossed more than just the threshold into emergency veterinary surgery. He had entered a world where he would have to fight not just for Runders' physical recovery, but for justice against people who saw animals as nothing more than commodities to be manipulated and exploited. The extraordinary world of high-stakes animal crime was opening before him, and Jake Martinez was about to discover that saving Runders' life was only the beginning of their ordeal together. The police arrived at Camden Veterinary Clinic within an hour of Dr. Camden's call, but Detective Sarah Morrison's initial skepticism was evident in her expression as she studied the surgical evidence. A seasoned investigator with 15 years on the force, she had seen plenty of fraud cases involving expensive animals, and her first instinct was to question Jake's motives. "Let me understand this correctly, Mr. Martinez," Detective Morrison said, flipping through her notebook. You defied your employer's direct orders, authorized expensive emergency surgery on an animal worth $800,000, and now you're claiming someone deliberately injured this bull to manipulate a sale? Jake felt his credibility being dissected with surgical precision. Detective, I know how this looks, but the evidence is right there in the surgical photos. Those puncture wounds were made by someone with veterinary knowledge and access to Runders. Dr. Camden stepped forward, her professional reputation lending weight to Jake's claims. Detective Morrison, I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 20 years. I've never seen internal injuries that precise and strategically placed occur naturally. Someone did this deliberately. But Detective Morrison's next question revealed the first major obstacle they would face. Dr. Camden, who else knew you were performing this surgery today? Who had access to information about the bull's condition and your findings? The answer chilled Jake to the bone. Dr. Camden's assistant, who had helped prep the surgical suite and monitored Runders throughout the operation, was Marcus Riverton's nephew, a detail that Jake had never thought to question until this moment. Tommy Riverton has been working here part-time for 6 months, Dr. E. Camden said slowly, her face pale as the implications became clear. He's studying to become a veterinary technician, and he's been present for dozens of surgeries. He would have had access to all our equipment and knowledge of bovine anatomy. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Riverton. Martinez, you've got 2 hours to get that bull ready for transport. My buyer is waiting, and this deal is happening today whether you cooperate or not. The message felt more like a threat than a business communication, and Jake showed it to Detective Morrison. He's trying to force a sale before we can investigate what really happened to Runders. Detective Morrison studied the message, her skepticism beginning to shift toward genuine concern. Mr. Martinez, I need you to understand something. If you're right about this conspiracy, you're not just fighting fraud, you're challenging people with significant financial resources and local influence. Are you prepared for what that might mean? Before Jake could answer, Dr. Camden's assistant burst into the recovery room where they were meeting. Dr. Camden, there's a problem. Tommy didn't show up for his shift today, and when I called his apartment, the landlord said he moved out last night, left no forwarding address. The disappearance of the one person who could have inflicted Runders' injuries confirmed Jake's worst suspicions, but it also eliminated their best hope of gathering evidence. Without Tommy Riverton's testimony or presence, proving the conspiracy would become exponentially more difficult. There's something else, Detective Morrison said grimly. I ran a background check on Marcus Riverton while we've been talking. 3 years ago, he was investigated for insurance fraud involving a racehorse that mysteriously became ill just before a major policy payout. The charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. Jake felt the walls closing in around him. He was facing not just a single incident of animal cruelty, but a pattern of behavior by people who had successfully evaded justice before. His decision to save Runders had put him in direct conflict with individuals who had money, connections, and experience in manipulating the system. Dr. Camden proved herself a crucial ally when she made an unexpected announcement. Detective Morrison, I'm formally refusing to release this bull to Marcus Riverton until a full investigation is completed. As the treating veterinarian, I have legal authority to hold any animal under my care if I believe it's in danger. But their victory was short-lived. Marcus Riverton arrived at the clinic an hour later with a court order signed by Judge Harold Westbrook, a close friend and business partner who had expedited the legal paperwork to force Runders' immediate release. You people have interfered with my business long enough, Riverton snarled, waving the court order. That bull is my property, and he's being transferred to his new owner today. Any further obstruction will result in lawsuits that will destroy both your careers. Jake watched helplessly as legal documents trumped medical evidence and ethical concerns. The system that should have protected Runders was being manipulated by the same people who had hurt him. Justice seemed as elusive as smoke, disappearing every time Jake thought he could grasp it. Standing in the clinic parking lot as transport trucks arrived to collect Runders, Jake faced his first real test in this extraordinary world he had entered. The bull who had trusted him completely was being taken away by the very people who had betrayed that trust, and Jake had to decide whether to accept defeat or find another way to fight. Dr. Camden placed a steady hand on his shoulder. This isn't over, Jake. We have the surgical evidence Detective Morrison believes our story, and sometimes the best battles are fought outside the courtroom. As Runders was loaded into the transport truck, the magnificent bull's eyes found Jake one last time. Even sedated and weakened from surgery, there was no accusation in that gaze, only continued faith that his human would find a way to protect him. Jake realized that crossing the threshold into this world of conspiracy and corruption was only the beginning. The real tests of his courage, determination, and loyalty were just starting, and the enemies he faced had more resources and experience than he could have imagined. 3 days after Runders was forcibly removed from Dr. Camden's clinic, Jake Martinez sat in his empty apartment staring at eviction notices and unpaid bills scattered across his kitchen table. Marcus Riverton had made good on his threats. Jake was not only unemployed but blacklisted throughout the Nebraska ranching community. No one would hire a trainer who had betrayed his employer's trust. But Jake's financial ruin paled in comparison to his concern for Runders. Detective Morrison's investigation had stalled due to lack of cooperation from key witnesses and the mysterious disappearance of crucial evidence. The bull had been transported to an undisclosed location, supposedly for recovery and rehabilitation, before being sold to his new owner. Dr. Camden called with disturbing news. "Jake, I've been asking around the veterinary community about Tommy Riverton. 3 colleagues mentioned that he's been asking detailed questions about bovine sedatives and surgical procedures that would leave minimal evidence. I think he's done this before." The revelation confirmed Jake's worst fears. Runders wasn't the first victim of this conspiracy, and he wouldn't be the last unless someone stopped the pattern. But approaching the truth meant Jake would have to infiltrate a network of corrupt ranchers, veterinarians, and officials who had successfully operated for years. Jake's plan was desperate and dangerous. Using his reputation and connections in the rodeo circuit, he would pose as a potential buyer interested in acquiring distressed bulls at below-market prices. It was the only way to get close enough to gather evidence and locate Runders. "This is insane," Detective Morrison warned during their clandestine meeting at a diner outside town. "If these people are as dangerous as we suspect, you're walking into a trap. They've already destroyed your career. What makes you think they won't destroy you?" But Jake's resolve was unshakable. "Detective, Runders trusted me to protect him, and I failed. That bull is somewhere suffering because I couldn't prevent powerful people from taking him away. I won't abandon him now." Dr. Camden provided Jake with untraceable recording equipment and medical supplies that might be needed if they found other injured animals. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, her voice tight with worry. "These people have resources and connections we can't match through official channels." Jake's first lead came from an unexpected source, Elena Santos, a former ranch hand who had quit Riverton's operation 6 months earlier after witnessing things that didn't sit right. She agreed to meet Jake at an abandoned cattle auction house after ensuring they weren't being followed. "There's a place called Blackwater Ranch about 50 miles north of here," Elena revealed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Riverton has connections there, and they specialize in rehabilitating animals that need to disappear from their original ownership records. Bulls go in sick and worthless, then mysteriously recover once the paperwork is transferred." The information provided Jake with a destination, but approaching Blackwater Ranch would require careful planning and nerves of steel. If Elena was right, Jake would be entering the heart of the conspiracy, a place where valuable animals were systematically abused and stolen through fraudulent medical claims. As Jake drove through the Nebraska countryside toward what might be Runders' location, he realized he was approaching more than just a physical destination. He was approaching the inmost cave of his own fears and limitations, the place where he would have to confront not just external enemies, but his own doubts about whether one person could fight a system designed to protect wealth and power over truth and justice. The setting sun cast long shadows across the empty highway as Jake approached the most dangerous phase of his mission to save Runders and expose the conspiracy that had already destroyed his old life. Everything he had learned, everyone he had come to trust, and every ounce of courage he possessed would be tested in the confrontation that lay ahead. Blackwater Ranch appeared on the horizon like a fortress, its high fences and security measures suggesting that whatever happened, there was meant to stay hidden from the outside world. Jake's hands trembled as he drove through the gates of Blackwater Ranch, his fake identity as Jim Morrison, livestock broker from Colorado, feeling paper thin under the scrutinized gaze of armed security guards. The ranch's owner, Vincent Blackwater, had agreed to meet with him only after Jake demonstrated knowledge of specific code words Elena Santos had provided. "You understand, Mr. Morrison," Blackwater said as they walked toward the holding pens. "Our operation requires absolute discretion. We provide specialized recovery services for animals whose previous owners encountered financial difficulties." The euphemism made Jake's stomach turn, but he maintained his cover as an unscrupulous buyer interested in acquiring valuable bulls at reduced prices. The tour of the facility revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Dozens of premium cattle being held in substandard conditions, their identification tags removed, their medical records falsified. Then Jake saw him. In a remote pen at the far end of the facility, Runders stood alone, his magnificent frame gaunt from poor nutrition and stress. The bull's coat had lost its lustrous sheen, and his eyes held a hollow despair that broke Jake's heart. But when Runders caught sight of Jake approaching, recognition flared in those dark eyes like a spark of hope. "That one's not for sale yet," Blackwater said quickly, noticing Jake's interest. "Still recovering from some complications. Previous owner was too sentimental, authorized expensive surgery that wasn't necessary. We're correcting those mistakes." Jake realized with horror that correcting mistakes meant allowing Runders' surgical wounds to become infected through deliberate neglect. The bull was being systematically weakened to justify an even lower sale price to Blackwater's criminal network. "Actually, damaged goods don't concern me," Jake said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I specialize in rehabilitation cases. What would you want for him as is?" Blackwater's eyes narrowed with suspicion and greed. "That particular animal has a complicated history. His previous trainer caused significant problems by interfering with a legitimate business transaction. We'd need insurance that there wouldn't be any follow-up complications." The threat was unmistakable. Blackwater knew exactly who Jake was, and this entire meeting had been a trap. Jake's cover had been blown from the moment he contacted them, and now he was isolated at a remote criminal operation with no backup and no way to call for help. "You see, Jake Martinez," Blackwater continued, dropping all pretense, "we've been watching you since you first stuck your nose into our business. Your reputation for being sentimental about animals made you predictable. We knew you'd come looking for your precious bull." Security guards emerged from behind buildings, surrounding Jake with weapons drawn. His recording equipment had been detected and confiscated, his cell phone was dead, and Dr. Camden and Detective Morrison had no idea where he had gone. But as Jake faced what appeared to be certain death or disappearance, something extraordinary happened. Runders, despite his weakened condition, began moving toward the fence that separated him from Jake. The bull's movements were labored but determined, and his eyes held the same unwavering trust that had sustained their relationship from the beginning. "Even dying, that stupid animal still thinks you can save him," Blackwater sneered. "Bulls are just livestock, Martinez. The sooner you learn that, the easier this will be." Jake looked into Runders' eyes and saw not just trust, but a challenge. The bull was asking his human companion to be worthy of the bond they had forged, to find strength and courage in the darkest moment when everything seemed lost. In that moment of connection, Jake realized that his ordeal wasn't just about physical survival. It was about proving that the relationship between human and animal could transcend the cold calculations of profit and power that drove people like Blackwater and Marcus Riverton. Standing in the shadow of armed guards, facing the apparent end of his rescue mission, Jake Martinez found himself at the crucial moment where heroes either discover their true strength or surrender to the forces that seem invincible. The sound of sirens piercing the Nebraska evening air was the most beautiful music Jake Martinez had ever heard. As police vehicles surrounded Blackwater Ranch with flashing lights and tactical teams, Vincent Blackwater's confident demeanor crumbled into panic and desperate attempts to destroy evidence. "How?" Blackwater snarled at Jake, who remained focused on Runders despite the chaos erupting around them. "We monitored all communications. You came here alone." Detective Morrison emerged from the lead vehicle, her expression grim but triumphant. "Mr. Martinez wasn't alone, Blackwater. We've been tracking your operation for months through financial records and veterinary supply purchases. Jake's visit simply gave us probable cause for the warrants we needed." The truth emerged as arrests were made throughout the facility. Dr. Camden had never trusted Jake to undertake such a dangerous mission without backup. She had contacted federal authorities who specialized in agricultural crime, providing them with the surgical evidence and financial trail that connected Blackwater Ranch to a multi-state livestock fraud operation. Elena Santos wasn't the only former employee willing to testify, Detective Morrison explained as paramedics attended to Jake's minor injuries. Once word spread that someone was finally investigating, 3 more whistleblowers came forward with evidence of animal abuse and fraudulent sales. But Jake's attention remained fixed on Runders, who stood motionless in his pen, too weak to approach the fence, but still watching his human protector with unwavering faith. Dr. Camden arrived with a mobile veterinary unit, her face grave as she assessed the bull's deteriorated condition. "The surgical sites are severely infected," she reported after examining Runders. "They've been deliberately denied proper medical care to weaken him further. But he's strong, Jake. With immediate treatment, he'll make a full recovery." As veterinary technicians began administering antibiotics and IV fluids, something remarkable happened. Runders, despite his weakness and the bustling medical activity around him, took several unsteady steps toward Jake. With tremendous effort, the magnificent bull lowered his massive head and rested it gently against Jake's chest, the same gesture of trust and comfort he had shown before his original surgery. "He knew you'd come for him," Dr. Camden said softly, tears visible in her professional composure. "Even after everything they put him through, he never stopped believing you'd find a way to save him." The reward for Jake's courage extended far beyond Runders' rescue. Federal investigators had uncovered a network involving 17 ranches across 6 states, with estimated fraud totaling over $12 million. Marcus Riverton, Tommy Riverton, Judge Westbrook, and dozens of co-conspirators faced federal charges ranging from animal cruelty to racketeering. More importantly, Jake's actions had sparked a movement within the veterinary and ranching communities. Dr. Camden was appointed to head a new federal task force on agricultural crime, and Jake was offered a position as chief investigator specializing in cases involving animal welfare and fraud. "You know what the most remarkable thing is?" Detective Morrison asked as they watched Runders being loaded into a medical transport for proper treatment. "You started this to save one bull, but you've ended up protecting thousands of animals from this criminal network." Standing in the aftermath of the raid, surrounded by evidence of justice finally being served, Jake realized he had gained something more valuable than career redemption or financial security. He had discovered that one person's refusal to accept injustice could indeed change an entire system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the innocent. Runders' gentle rumble of contentment as the transport doors closed seemed to acknowledge not just his rescue, but Jake's transformation from a defeated trainer into a champion for all creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. The reward was the knowledge that trust, loyalty, and moral courage could triumph over corruption, greed, and institutional indifference when someone was brave enough to fight for what was right. This incredible story of loyalty and justice continues to inspire. If you're moved by Jake and Runders' amazing bond, hit that like button to support more stories that prove love and determination can overcome any obstacle. Subscribe for more heartwarming tales of courage. 6 weeks after the Blackwater Ranch raid, Jake Martinez stood in the sunshine at Camden Veterinary Clinic, watching Runders graze peacefully in the recovery pasture. The bull's strength had returned dramatically under Dr. Camden's expert care, his magnificent black coat gleaming with health, his eyes bright with the intelligence and spirit that had first captivated Jake 18 months earlier. But despite their victory over the criminal network, Jake found himself reluctant to fully embrace his new role as a federal agricultural crime investigator. The offer represented everything he had dreamed of: the chance to practice veterinary medicine while protecting animals from abuse and exploitation. Yet something held him back from committing completely to this new path. "Having second thoughts about the federal position?" Dr. Camden asked, joining Jake at the pasture fence. "You've been quiet since the trial ended last week." Jake watched Runders move with his characteristic grace and power, no longer the broken, infected animal they had rescued from Blackwater Ranch. "It's not the job," Jake said slowly. "It's leaving him behind. Runders doesn't belong in an evidence facility or government custody, but I can't afford to buy him from the federal asset seizure, and I don't know who else would understand what he needs." The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Marcus Riverton, Vincent Blackwater, and 17 co-conspirators faced federal prison sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. But Runders, like hundreds of other seized animals, had become federal property pending resolution of the asset forfeiture cases. Dr. Camden smiled mysteriously. Jake, there's something I need to tell you. The Department of Agriculture has been looking for a permanent home for Runders, somewhere he can live safely while serving as an educational ambassador for animal welfare. They've proposed establishing a training center where investigators can learn to recognize signs of abuse and fraud. Jake's heart jumped. What kind of training center? The kind that would need a director with both veterinary expertise and practical experience with large animals. Someone who understands the criminal mind, but also has an unshakable bond with the animals we're trying to protect. Dr. Camden's expression grew serious. They want you to run it, Jake. And they want Runders to be the program's founding ambassador. The offer was more than Jake had dared to hope for. A chance to continue his investigative work while maintaining his relationship with Runders, plus the opportunity to train a new generation of agricultural crime investigators who would understand that animals were partners, not just evidence. But Jake's past failures haunted his confidence. What if I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility? What if I let down the animals who depend on the investigators I train? Runders, as if sensing the importance of the conversation, approached the fence where Jake and Dr. Camden stood. The bull's massive head nudged Jake's shoulder gently, and his dark eyes held the same unwavering faith that had sustained them through their darkest moments. He's telling you the answer, Dr. Camden observed. That bull has been through hell because of human greed and corruption, but he still chooses to trust. If Runders believes in you, maybe it's time you believed in yourself. Jake felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders, but this time it felt like purpose rather than burden. The road back to his ordinary world, the world of simple bull training and uncomplicated relationships, was no longer appealing. He had glimpsed something larger, a calling that combined his professional skills with his moral convictions. There's one condition, Jake said finally. If I do this, if I accept this position, I want to make sure every investigator understands what I learned from Runders. These aren't just livestock or assets or evidence. They're individuals with personalities, emotions, and the capacity for both suffering and trust. Dr. Camden extended her hand. I think that's exactly what the program needs, Jake, someone who sees the heart behind the science. As they shook hands, sealing Jake's commitment to his new role, Runders lifted his massive head and released a deep, rumbling sound. Not distress, but contentment. The bull seemed to understand that his ordeal had served a greater purpose, transforming both himself and his human companion into advocates for all creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. The road back from their extraordinary adventure would lead not to the ordinary world they had left behind, but to a new ordinary world where their partnership could protect countless other animals from the suffering they had endured together. 3 months into his new role as director of the Agricultural Crime Training Center, Jake Martinez faced his greatest challenge yet, convincing a skeptical audience of veteran law enforcement officers that animal behavior could be crucial evidence in fraud investigations. The conference room at the federal training facility was filled with detectives, prosecutors, and investigators who viewed Jake's approach with open doubt. Gentlemen, with respect, interrupted Detective Frank Morrison from the Denver Police Department. We're here to learn about financial crimes and evidence collection, not animal psychology. How is watching bull behavior going to help us prosecute criminal conspiracies? Jake felt the familiar weight of professional skepticism that had once crushed his confidence. But this time, instead of retreating into self-doubt, he drew strength from the partnership that had brought him to this moment. Through the conference room window, Runders grazed peacefully in the demonstration pasture, his presence a constant reminder of what was possible when someone refused to accept injustice. Detective Morrison, let me show you something, Jake said calmly, leading the group outside to the pasture where Runders waited. This bull was the victim of a $12 million fraud conspiracy. The criminals counted on investigators like yourselves dismissing animal behavior as irrelevant to serious crime. Jake approached Runders with the same gentle respect he had shown 18 months earlier at Riverton Ranch. The bull's immediate response, ears forward, calm approach, gentle nuzzling, demonstrated the profound trust that had developed between them through shared trauma and recovery. What you're seeing, Jake explained to the assembled investigators, is an animal who has learned to trust again after experiencing deliberate cruelty at human hands. But watch what happens when I change my body language. Jake subtly shifted his posture to mirror the aggressive, dominating stance that many handlers used with large animals. Runder's reaction was immediate and telling. Ears back, head raised defensively, several steps backward to create distance. Now imagine you're investigating a ranch where handlers claim their animals are healthy and well treated, Jake continued, resuming his calm demeanor as Runders relaxed. But every animal shows this defensive response to human approach. That's not normal behavior. That's evidence of systematic abuse that directly supports fraud charges. The change in the investigator's attention was palpable. Detective Morrison leaned forward with new interest. You're saying animal behavior is essentially witness testimony that can't be coached or falsified? Dr. Camden, who had joined Jake as co-instructor for the program, stepped forward with a case file. Exactly. In the Blackwater Ranch investigation, we identified 17 different facilities involved in the conspiracy simply by documenting abnormal stress behaviors in animals that were supposedly receiving premium care. Jake felt something profound shifting in the room. These hardened investigators were beginning to understand that animal welfare wasn't just an emotional issue, it was practical evidence that could make or break criminal cases involving millions of dollars and complex fraud networks. But the real resurrection came when Detective Morrison approached Runders directly, following Jake's guidance about respectful body language. The bull, after careful assessment, allowed the detective to touch his massive shoulder, a gesture of acceptance that brought visible emotion to the tough investigator's face. I've been investigating white-collar crime for 15 years, Morrison said quietly, and I've never had a victim communicate so clearly without saying a word. This bull is telling us everything we need to know about the people who hurt him. Over the following days, Jake watched as skeptical investigators transformed into passionate advocates for using animal behavior evidence in their cases. They learned to read stress signals, recognize signs of abuse, and understand how animal responses could corroborate financial evidence of criminal activity. The resurrection wasn't just professional validation for Jake's methods. It was the birth of a new approach to agricultural crime investigation that honored both the scientific evidence and the individual suffering of animal victims. Standing in the demonstration pasture at sunset, watching Runders interact calmly with a group of investigators who had initially dismissed animal behavior as irrelevant, Jake realized he had achieved something remarkable. He had risen from the ashes of his destroyed career to create something entirely new. A training program that would protect countless animals by teaching investigators to see them as individual victims rather than mere property. Runders' gentle rumble of contentment as investigators documented his calm behavior seemed to acknowledge the transformation they had achieved together. Both bull and trainer had been reborn from their ordeal into advocates who could give voice to creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. 1 year after the Blackwater Ranch raid, Jake Martinez stood before a packed auditorium at the National Agricultural Crime Prevention Conference, Runders grazing peacefully in a portable pen beside the speaker's platform. The audience included ranchers, veterinarians, law enforcement officers, and animal welfare advocates from across the United States, all gathered to learn from the partnership that had revolutionized agricultural crime investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake began, his voice steady with hard-earned confidence, I want to tell you about the moment that changed everything. It wasn't when we uncovered a $12 million conspiracy, or when we arrested 17 criminals, or even when we rescued hundreds of abused animals. It was when an exhausted bull chose to rest his head on my shoulder and trust me with his life. The story that followed had been told hundreds of times in courtrooms, training sessions, and academic conferences, but Jake never grew tired of sharing it. Each telling reinforced the central truth he had discovered, that genuine partnership between humans and animals could expose corruption that traditional investigation methods missed. Runders taught me that animals don't lie, Jake continued, gesturing toward the magnificent bull who had become the most recognizable figure in agricultural crime prevention. They can't be bribed, intimidated, or convinced to change their testimony. Their behavior tells the truth about how they've been treated, and that truth has convicted more criminals than any financial audit or document analysis. Dr. Camden joined Jake on stage, carrying a thick folder of case files. In the past year, the behavioral assessment protocols developed at our training center have been used in 43 different criminal investigations across 16 states. The conviction rate in cases using animal behavior evidence is 97%. But the statistics, impressive as they were, paled beside the individual stories of transformation. Jake introduced Maria Santos, a former ranch worker who had overcome her fear of reporting abuse after learning that animals could serve as witnesses. Detective Morrison, now a specialist in agricultural crime, described how understanding animal psychology had made him a more effective investigator and a better person. The elixir we're sharing today, Jake explained to the audience, isn't just a new investigative technique. It's a fundamental shift in how we see the relationship between humans and animals. When we recognize that animals are individuals with emotions, intelligence, and the capacity for both suffering and trust, we transform not just our professional methods, but our entire approach to justice. The presentation's climax came when Jake demonstrated the trust exercise that had become the signature of their training program. As he approached Runders with calm, respectful body language, the bull responded with the same gentle acceptance he had shown during their darkest moments at Blackwater Ranch. "This bull has every reason to fear and distrust humans," Jake said, as Runders lowered his massive head for gentle scratching behind the ears. "But he chooses trust over fear, partnership over isolation, hope over despair. That choice has saved countless other animals from the suffering he endured." A young veterinary student in the audience raised her hand. "Dr. Martinez, what's the most important lesson you learned from your experience with Runders?" Jake paused, looking into the bull's dark eyes that had first captured his attention 18 months earlier. "I learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about caring more about someone else's welfare than your own safety. Runders taught me that the strongest bonds are forged not in moments of triumph, but in moments when you choose to trust, despite having every reason to doubt." As the conference concluded and attendees filed past to meet Runders personally, Jake reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The young bull trainer who had once felt powerless against institutional corruption had returned to his community carrying the elixir of knowledge, courage, and unshakable faith in the power of interspecies partnership. The transformation extended far beyond Jake and Runders. Agricultural crime units now operated in 37 states, using behavioral assessment techniques that honored animals as individuals, rather than treating them as mere evidence. Veterinary schools had incorporated animal welfare advocacy into their standard curricula. Ranch workers felt empowered to report abuse without fear of retaliation. Standing in the conference hall as Runders peacefully accepted attention from dozens of admirers, Jake realized that their ordeal had created something larger than either of them could have imagined. They had returned from their journey carrying not just personal healing, but a methodology that would protect future generations of animals from exploitation and abuse. The elixir they shared was the revolutionary understanding that when humans choose to truly listen to animals, not just their words, but their behavior, their needs, their capacity for trust, both species are transformed into something greater than either could become alone. This amazing story proves that one person's courage can change an entire system. If Jake and Runders' incredible journey inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that show how love, determination, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals can overcome any obstacle.